Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Life Unpotted. We're very excited that you are here with us today. We have a great episode, as usual, feeling good, feeling ready to chat. And I'm looking forward to this episode because there's a lot that has been happening for me in my life, and I'm ready to process it in a nice space of a podcast. So with all of that being said, before we get into it, I want to give you the reminder to join our community Zooms on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. We love these. We had one just the other night. We had one person join, and it was a great intimate space. And sometimes it's like 5, 6 people, maybe sometimes 10 people. You never know what you're going to get. So it is a nice experience to have one person there, and sometimes it'll be more. So we just want to keep building out this community because it is such a fun and intimate experience. So on the topic of today's episode, really want to talk about this idea that you don't ever have to change yourself. And I recently had an experience with my social media that was kind of the last straw for me because I've been thinking a lot about my tendency to change myself depending upon who I'm around. And I've done this all my life. You can't show parts of yourself until you're with your close friends or your partner or people who get you. And I think this is probably maybe going back to middle school when, it's scary to be around adults because they won't get me. I'm just going to go be with my friends because they'll see me and they'll know me. I think that's probably a relatable experience. But these ideas and philosophies and experiences and mentalities can totally go into our day-to-day lives and stop us from having the best possible experience that we can on a day-to-day basis, on a moment-to-moment basis. And that is ultimately what I realized. I have changed a lot in the last 3 years. My entire world has changed. And that is because I've allowed people to see me as who I really am. And that's why it felt like the very last straw for me was to vulnerably post something of what I would talk to someone on a day-to-day basis about onto my Instagram feed and kind of acknowledging the fact that I have changed and I'm not hiding anymore. I always knew myself to hide. And this is just something that I'm not doing anymore. And to be honest, it didn't matter if I posted it on social media, right? It always goes back to me and me allowing myself to be me. And that was ultimately why I decided to be vulnerable, to not try and be anything, and to be unmasked entirely in a place where it's really common to wear a mask. And I'll let you know that it was fucking amazing. It felt really good. And we can get more into it, but this was just something that was super cathartic, and it really has me thinking about this idea of why do we change ourselves and what can happen when we decide we're not going to change ourselves anymore, right? So let's get into it, Soph.
I think this is a really, really important topic. And we actually had a letting go of self-judgment episode. I think that was in May, or maybe when we first started talking or first started the new season of Life Unpotted. And I feel like I have learned so much more just about how scared I have been my whole life to let my peers see who I really am. And it's interesting, Daisy, you're saying, I want to let people know I've changed. And in a way, it's interesting because it's like, have you changed? Or are you just getting closer to you? Are you just letting go of the mask that you've worn all these years? Because for me, what I realized after deciding to finally post on social media and post on Instagram and start posting these kind of topics we talk about in the podcast, more philosophical, more mindful, more healing, self-growth, I was faced with a lot of discomfort of judging myself. And what I really realized is that I never knew how much I judge myself. And I think a lot of times we don't really realize this because we're going through life and we're never put in uncomfortable situations where we kind of have to face ourselves and say, oh, this is what it feels like to actually show up as me. And what I've learned from posting on social media, and recently I've even unfolded more and more of that, and I'm showing more parts of myself, is that, wow, why would I ever spend my life holding back because I'm scared of what someone else is think? And I think maybe, Daisy, maybe we can just dive in real quick of like, why do we care about what other people think? What is that rooted in? And also, how do we get to a point to, if we are somebody who feels uncomfortable or we are somebody who judges ourselves if feels insecure, what advice would you give to them to help them recognize that they can feel comfortable expressing themselves in whatever way is true to them?
It's interesting because it's never really anyone else that we're afraid of judging us. At its core, it's our fear. It's our judgments. It's our shame that we have at ourselves. And it's very easy to not hold accountability for ourselves and to look at everyone around us and say, oh, that's the reason why I can't be myself. That person is the reason why I can't be myself. And I think this is probably learned at a very young age where we internalize that someone else doesn't like us for us being ourselves, when in reality, it never had anything to do with us from the start. It was always someone else experiencing something in us that they didn't like, that had everything to do with them, because we only ever experience things through ourselves. And I don't think we're taught that, because think of like when we go to school, we're trying to fit in with the girls, the cool girls or the cool guys, or maybe you're not, maybe you're just trying to be you, and that's awesome. But for me, I felt like I was always trying to change myself, going back to third grade of trying to fit in with the clique, the girls in third grade who had a clique, you know what I mean? And they were saying that person can't join, but this person can. So in those moments, you really learn to morph yourself into something so that you're a part of the collective, so you're a part of something. Because if you be yourself, you're probably going to be ostracized from the group. And that literally was an experience that I saw when I was like 8 years old. So we've internalized our entire lives that being us is not okay. And I think this is a common experience, even for people who do feel comfortable being themselves. I think it always goes deeper into that level. And I think as far as it goes for learning how to maybe embrace yourself more, or even just feel more comfortable in your own skin, is it's such a journey. I think you have to look at yourself in the mirror and not cringe at yourself. You can't get uncomfortable by yourself. Or the point is that you will feel uncomfortable by these things, by showing up and doing the hobby that you've always wanted to do, or posting something on social media you've always wanted to post, or simply admitting something to yourself you've always known was true and following that out. I think it starts with us. I think that we don't have to change anything externally. It starts with our ability to be comfortable with ourselves. And that can start with just being able to listen to our thoughts, because we know it's really common and it's really easy to be able to be so distracted. I saw this really interesting TikTok the other day that was talking about this experiment that was done, I think somewhere in Northern California on the redwood trees. And they injected adrenaline into all of the trees in the wintertime. And basically within a year, all the trees died. And the person in the TikTok was referencing, we look at our lives and we think winter is something that we should actually just be our spring or be our summer. When in reality, we should slow down. We should quiet our thoughts. We shouldn't be working as much. The days are shorter. We should be relaxing more. It was interesting, the comparison, the contrast to where the trees, of course, they looked different when they shot them with adrenaline because they were alive. They were bright, you know, how leaves die a little bit, go inwards a little bit. During the wintertime, they were vibrant. So it's interesting to contrast that with our lives, saying if we're going full speed, thinking about this work and this work and this work I have to do, or climbing the ladder, we're never alone with our thoughts. We're never quiet with our thoughts. And I think the answers to everything are us being quiet with our thoughts, because that's really uncomfortable when you're not used to being quiet with them. And that's totally normal to be working a 9 to 5, 9 to 7, 9 to 9 job where we're working all the time. Whenever we have a break, we just want to relax. So there's no space for us to go in depth, inward. So I think getting comfortable in our own skin really starts with getting comfortable in our own mind, because we perceive our entire reality through our mind. So I think it's really interesting because you can say, oh, you know, I'm having a great day today. And 5 days ago, you were having an awful day. But it all goes back to, how is your mind perceiving things right now? And in order to really be yourself and understand yourself, it's just a matter of, there is no self. All there is this experience right now, and getting to a place where you can just experience life is how you're going to tap into your natural state of who you are. And you're not going to think about it because you shouldn't be having to think about who you are ever. I think that's the ultimate goal. So I think it just gets, I think for us, it's just getting comfortable with our thoughts, even though a lot of discomfort arises from sitting with our thoughts. But I think all of the answers are within us, especially our thoughts.
Well, I think it's interesting. It's like getting comfortable with our thoughts so we can become aware of the way we think about ourselves. Because I think a lot of the time, and like using the example of like being in third grade, like I had that experience of like trying so hard to fit in or trying so hard to fit into the in group. And I noticed I tried to do that my whole life, whether when I was in college to law school, to the point now where I'm posting on social media and I'm like, why do I care if that person specifically views my story? And we learn that we start to form these associations that certain people maybe are more valuable or certain people's opinions matter more than other people's opinions. And I've definitely seen that with, if you think about like the popular group growing up, it's like you constantly try to be that because you think that's the better way to be. And also going back to these younger years, like we did get ostracized. I personally experienced that of like, oh, you're not like that. Well, you can't be in that group. And I think that experience growing up in an environment when you're in school with these peers who are so young and have no idea what they're saying, but the impacts that has can really shape the way you view yourself. It can really shape the way that you view yourself and the way you show up in the world. And it's crazy how we can carry those insecurities. Like I'm 30 and I'm like, wow, it's taken me until now to realize that I have been so scared of expressing myself. And here's the thing I think is really important to recognize. For anyone listening to this or anyone who's saying, I am pretty confident. I'm confident. I'm good. I thought that too. I've always been a very outgoing person. I've always been a very quote unquote confident person. But I was really confident in the mold I made myself fit in. I was never actually confident in the things I really wanted to talk about. But the thing is, I don't think we realize that because we don't know otherwise. We're so caught up in that role we've been playing of this person that we've evolved to be from growing up and going to college and graduating, if you go on that path, that it's not until you do something uncomfortable, which for us was starting a podcast and really for me posting on social media, you realize all the things you thought about yourself. So I just think it's really important to put yourself in uncomfortable situations that show you the way you view yourself. Because I think a large part of this conversation is what you were saying earlier. We think so-and-so is judging us. We think we are experiencing the judgments of other people. But it's not until you realize, oh, it's actually just me judging myself. And I can say that confidently because now I'm at a point where I feel confident posting and sharing. And I have no idea what anyone else thinks. It's not that their perception shifted. It's that my perception shifted.
That's exactly it. Because you can cringe. Think of the moment or the experience where you get on stage and you see someone like dancing and they're free. They're doing whatever they want and they're feeling really good. But the thought of you doing that, getting on the stage and dancing makes you cringe. So you cringe at the idea of them doing that. Or maybe there was a point in their experience where getting up on stage and dancing, they did cringe, but it wasn't because anyone was watching them. It was because they were watching themselves and that didn't feel comfortable, but that didn't stop them from doing it. So oftentimes following this urge to want to do things, but to like be so uncomfortable seeing yourself do that, that is where we stay stuck in not feeling comfortable in our own skin. And it's also why we feel envious towards someone else who is comfortable in their own skin. And it's so easy to have someone walk into the room. This was for me. Have someone walk into the room and I just heard someone outside my room and my mind, my body, what it wanted to do was change myself, hide myself. And this is something that I've stopped doing. I've stopped caring at the fear of being seen because ultimately all it sets you up for is to be unhappy and to be unhappy with other people who are free in themselves. And I think this runs really, really deep in our society, really deep in generations, because now more than ever, people can be free to be who they want to be without repercussions. There's more freedom of expression these days. But that's kind of beside the point, because our society's progressed a lot. It's allowed us to be comfortable in being who we are without the fear of major repercussions for the most part, right? But when it comes to us, we're the gatekeepers of allowing ourselves to be us. And it's interesting because we so easily can get these ideas of who we are from years and years and years of experiences of thinking, this is who I am. And that's incredibly dangerous because we really are never who we think we are. It's all about how are we perceiving things in that moment. And a lot of the ways that we perceive things is based off of what's our emotional state, right? And if our mind is clouded, if our body is achy, these are going to fog our perception of how we view things and of how we view ourselves. So of course, we're going to change ourselves depending on who we're with, because we're not even comfortable enough to be with ourselves when we're alone. How would we be comfortable to be with ourselves when we're around people?
Yeah, it's a really good point because it's interesting. I feel like I spent a lot of my life being scared to be alone and being scared to be with my thoughts. And we care so much about what other people think about us because we're scared if people see us, they're going to judge us and they're going to see us, and then something bad will happen. And it's interesting how I think our society is really driven from the point we go to school to just growing up of wanting to be one specific type of person. You see that with the media, the way that certain type of people were portrayed in the media growing up. That's definitely gotten, more diversified as societies progress, and you see more representation in every different type of person in the media. But it's this idea that you're trying to change yourself. And I think what I've really realized recently is that we suffer so much when we think who we are is not good enough. And we try so hard to keep changing that, to keep changing that, and to keep changing that, and to keep changing that, because I guess you think that you can be someone else. We think we can be someone else. And the reality of it is you can't be anyone else but who you are. Yes, you can evolve. Yes, you can grow, but you are you. And that's who you are. And you can't change that. You could try, and you'll probably feel uncomfortable your whole life because you're just wearing a mask. It's not you. So when we can let go of the idea that we have to change ourselves, we can feel much more comfortable recognizing that it's okay for people to see us. Not only is it okay, but it is amazing if people see you. And it goes to the whole example of how I used to be really scared, or I still have recently worked through a lot of insecurities of being philosophical. And I had the thought of being like, why am I scared to show people things I actually care about? And it's so interesting because you realize that nobody actually, and if somebody judges you, number one, they're just judging yourself. As illustrated perfectly, Daisy, by the whole cringe example. I used to cringe at people expressing themselves in the past, like, oh, I feel so uncomfortable. And it's just because you can't imagine yourself doing that. So when somebody is judging you, they are judging yourself. When someone is really comfortable in their own skin, they're not going to judge you, because how could they? They would be able to experience what you're doing and be able to really be like, wow, that's a beautiful expression of that person. But it's just the recognition that if we all spend our life holding back ourselves from showing ourselves to the world, I like to think of the analogy of you zoom out as if you're an alien and you're looking onto Earth and you just see everybody wearing a mask. And it's like, okay, so we're all wearing a mask. But what happens if everyone took off the mask? There would be no reason to hide because there would be nothing relative to compare. So I think that when you in your mind start to realize that you do not need to change yourself, who you are is whole and complete, there is no such thing as being better. Nobody is better. We are all the same. You then start to really be able to tap into who you are because you realize there is no other way to be. You cannot change that. It's you. And Like, Daisy, I'm curious for you maybe to talk about little, like, the insecurities you had with who you are and how you're now realizing, wow, there's so much beauty in that.
Yeah. I mean, before I go into that, the biggest lie that we're ever sold is that there is an identity that we have to become. But when in reality, there is no one to be, there's just an experience to be had. And this makes me think back to even being like in fourth grade, thinking I want to look like someone who is put together. So I would lay out my Abercrombie t-shirt that was red with my matching red headband, matching red socks. Like I would just be so obsessed with controlling these little things because I would so heavily identify with being that, with being what I was wearing, with being what the material items were that I had at such a young age.
I want to ask you, so do you think that you thought if you were that person, you would be happier? What
Yeah.
are we striving for when we try to change?
I thought I would be smart. I thought the pressure would be off of me. I thought that the pressure was on something else. It would no longer be on to me to carry that, right? It was me putting my expression into something else that wasn't even my expression. It was just trying to be something. It was a fixation. It was an obsession. And it was wanting to have everything in order, down to color coordination, which is so interesting because it's such a young age, but it's wanting control so bad. But maybe it's the fear of not being able to be alone with myself, even at such a young age, because I was always alone with myself because I was an only child. So I spent a lot of time alone. And I think it's interesting because I would find ways to not be with myself, even at that age, by obsessive cleaning, obsessive organizing, obsessive matching things. So I think it's really interesting. And I forget what your question was, but there's so much anxiety as kids, as adolescents I'm thinking of my first day of high school when I was going to a new high school where I didn't know anyone. And that was one of the biggest insecurities, was that I was terrified to talk in class. I was known as the shy girl, the quiet girl who had nothing to say. I was afraid to talk because my voice would tremble. I was afraid to be seen because what if I didn't fit in? I was in a different environment than what I had been in prior to that. I didn't know how to relate to these people. I was afraid to be me. I'd always hid behind people my entire life. And now I was in a new school, so I had no one to hide behind, So I think it's really interesting because my insecurities have been the same thing ever since. They've been with me my entire life, of being too quiet, not being the popular, quote unquote, fun, easy to talk to, extroverted person who everyone likes to be around. Not to mention, when I was in eighth grade, I was on a volleyball team with a bunch of older girls. And this story scarred me, but I've overcame it. I had hung out with another girl alone prior to practice. And one of the girls looked at me and her and was like, "You hung out with Daisy alone? That's so awkward. What did you even talk about with her?" Like, in front of me.
That stays with you your whole life until you work through it.
And I reflect on that and I think back to, well, what was that girl going through? She was very type A. I think she was under a lot of pressure. And there was something about me that she always picked on me. She didn't like me. I was the young one. I was the one that was not confident in myself. And she just loved to take advantage of that, to put things onto me instead of letting herself be seen. So everyone has these different coping mechanisms, but we internalize these experiences to think they actually have something to do with us, when that never had anything to do with me. I can see that now. But as someone who was already scared of being perceived as someone who was awkward, that was my worst nightmare. But it's interesting because
I just want to say I've had this realization too. Like, you think about, I remember so vividly looking at like the most popular group, right? And you think those people have it figured out and they're not suffering and they're not going through anything. And recently I've had the reflection of like, wow, the people I was striving to be, I had no idea what they were going through. I had no idea the ways in which they clung to being popular or looking a certain way or dressing a certain way because they were suffering They had a tough upbringing. They have things they were working through. And I think this is so clear, is that when we let go of division, when we remove the freaking label of popular that of course has stuck in our brain for so long, because we go to high school and we're around a bunch of people our age and it's so scary, is that everybody is insecure. Everybody is insecure. Everybody. And I think when you can have that recognition, you can look back at these experiences where you thought you were less than and you thought something was wrong with you and said, oh, what was that person going through? I wish I knew that then.
Right? Division runs rampant in high school, in our education system. The division of it's insane. It's so scarring in a lot of ways. And it's fascinating to look back on it with clear eyes, like you said, because nothing was ever the way that we thought it was, because at that time, our perception saw it that way, because our perception viewed things that way. But we look back and that was never what was really happening. That was just how we were perceiving it. But in reality, there was no association with any of that. That was all self-created. And I think that right there is what freedom comes from, is recognizing that we can reflect and see those experiences that we thought were fact and were true. And now we can so clearly see that they're not true, because we have different lens, we have different perspective, we have different experiences. But now we can take that and say, oh, the things that we feel like are so matter of fact and so real right now, we can't hold on to those as truth, because we can recognize that there's been things we thought were truth in the past, but they never were truth. It was just because that's the mindset that we had at that time. And that's something that will always change if we allow it to change and we allow the truth to be seen as they are. So it's something that is always changing, and no truths ever stay true forever. Things are always evolving, because we're always evolving and changing. And that definitely impacts the way we view things.
And I just want to really make clear here that when we're reflecting on these ideas we created about ourselves. So for me, I thought every single person in high school judged me. I thought everybody thought this idea about me, that I wasn't cool enough, or I wasn't smart, or going back to last week's episode, going to dumb math and thinking people were judging me. And it's interesting because it reminds me of even now. So just came home from Thanksgiving and I said, I'm going to go home and I'm going to let go the idea of what I think anyone in my household was thinking. And my experience has changed drastically because I'm letting go of that story I created. And here's the thing about stories. When we form a story in our head, especially at a really young age, we don't have the awareness to recognize it's a story. So what happens is we start to create this story that you're a loser, no one likes you, and you look back and you go, okay, maybe there is one person who said something to me, or two people. Was anyone else actually judging me, or was it just me? And then you realize that, and it's the aha, holy shit moment, because you realize this whole time, this feeling that you had about yourself of not thinking you're good enough, or thinking people don't like you, or thinking people don't think you're attractive, or all these things, was just you. And it was just reflecting this story that you have held on to, and it's not your fault, because nothing in your life ever gave you the chance to prove it otherwise. And that's exactly what the point is. And I think what Daisy's going to share when she talks about her experience posting on Instagram is that we have to give ourselves a chance to prove that the stories we've created ourselves are not true. If you think you're somebody who can't give a speech, give the speech. If you think you're someone who can't start a podcast, start a podcast. If you think you're someone who can't talk to the camera, talk to the camera. Because when we do this, we watch the story unfold and we're blown away, as I have been, if I never thought I'd be someone who could have a podcast or could have a social media following or to be coaching. And here I am doing all those things.
It makes me think, Sophie, back to the beginning of our relationship was the first time that you started posting videos of yourself. And I remember the struggle that you would go through because you had so many limiting beliefs about yourself, to where it took you a year to be able to even like really actually talk on the camera. Like you deviated a lot of times. And it was painful to watch. It was because it was painful for you to experience. And it's because you had an idea of yourself and you were afraid for people to see that you weren't that idea. So you had to actively work through it yourself. And that was painful.
And I think a large part of that experience is like recognizing that it's having the awareness that the experience you might be having may not actually be what's actually happening. So for me, like posting the videos, I literally felt my brain in a way felt like I was back in that cafeteria and I thought everyone around me was watching me. And I think what I've heard from listening to Joe Dispenza when he talks about the brain is that when our brain plays out trauma or very ingrained experiences, we think our brain thinks that's happening. So I'll go to post a video and my brain will think, oh, I'm back in that situation where I think everyone around me is talking about me and laughing at me. But what I realized, and I had to have the recognition to go, okay, this is all coming up, but it's not true. And that's the hardest thing I think to do in life is to recognize that your thoughts are not true. And that is freedom.
It's so interesting because there's things we can tell ourselves our entire life that we think are true. And this is one that I want to talk about. And it always goes back to coffee. I was thinking about recently, I try to not drink coffee. I try to tell myself, you can't drink coffee because you have an anxious baseline and this and that and all these things that I've told myself my entire life. Where Sophie had met up with one of her friends and he was telling her about someone he's doing a meditation course with, was saying like, it's never anything but you, even with coffee, even with caffeine. And I was thinking about this and I was like, there's a reason why I love coffee. There's something about it. And I was like, I don't want to restrict myself anymore. I'm visiting my family. There's all kinds of coffee here. There's all different types of experiences, different types of coffee, different cups for the coffee. You know what I mean? Like all the different stuffs, all the different fun things. And I was like, you know what? Fuck it. If I'm going to drink coffee, it's not going to make me anxious. It's just going to bring up the anxiety that's already dormant, that's already there, that is operating at a low level. So why don't I just drink this, but allow myself to relax, regardless of what I feel? And it's so interesting because I've had it the past 2 days and I've been totally fine and I've really enjoyed it. And this is a story that I feel I've told myself the last 3 years that I can't drink coffee. But the reality was I was just falling into anxiety in an unchecked way. And I was letting this idea that I couldn't handle caffeine control me from having an experience that I want to have. So this is a very, minuscule one in the grand scheme of things, but it's also not, because I just want to have fun and I want to live my life and I don't want to restrict myself. But this is just going to show an example of how, of a small level, these thoughts can control us. Of I can't handle caffeine. Have you tried? Have you thought about this? Have you considered that maybe you're just limiting yourself from feeling these things because all of those things are within you and you should feel them to move through them? Again, I'm not like a medical doctor, so I'm not recommending if your doctor tells you to not drink caffeine that you should. I'm just talking from my personal experience with it as someone who's never been told that. So things are never fixed. But going on with our episode from last week, talking about, how often do you make change through just the body or just the mind? It's a matter of saying things are always going to be changing if we are in tune with these tools, such as our body and our mind, that allow us to continuously move through things, that allow us to continuously take clues from these things versus settling on one thing. And just tying this back to our overall theme today of you don't have to change yourself, and you also don't have to settle on a version of yourself that you told yourself you were in the past, that other people made you internalize who you were in the past. And that's a very exciting thing, because I think once you fully understand that, that's where life begins, because you get to live your life for you and no one else in every single moment of your waking life.
To somebody listening, I think I would tell them maybe make a list of, okay, for me, my name's Sophie. So I would go make a list of the story of Sophie. what are the things that Sophie does? What are the things that I think people perceive Sophie? Oh, in the past I would have said, people don't think Sophie's smart. Okay. People don't think Sophie is whatever. So you go through that list, and I think that list really becomes the story we've created about ourselves. And so much of what we talk about on this podcast is letting go of that idea of yourself, because it's nothing more than just an idea. And that's what you see, like the idea, like our friend Andrew Murnane, he's like, I'm going to run the marathon because I've told myself my whole life, I'm not a runner. We start challenging these ideas. We start challenging these beliefs. And for me, I was thinking about this last night of like, I always thought that I could never be an entrepreneur. And I think because I associated that word with a feeling state, and I thought that the way I felt wasn't that. And it's just recognizing that there is no feeling state associated with being a runner. There is no feeling state associated with being an entrepreneur. All that requires is trying. All that requires is moving forward. And that's why I'm starting to believe, wow, anybody can create their own business. Anyone can do this.
I think an important one to also say is allowing yourself to be seen trying is a requirement for both of those things. And for anything, just to be yourself, to be afraid, to not be afraid, to have others see you trying.
So what went through your head, Daisy, as you worked to decide that you were finally going to post this on Instagram? Because I know that was a really big deal for you. So I think it'd be helpful to let the listeners know, like, the process before, the process during, and the process after.
The process before, we actually hosted our event with our friend Erica in New York, and I had a lot of insights from that. And my mind was racing that night before. And I was just thinking about how in that moment, I committed to myself at that event to show up as someone who embodied me, to put it simply. I was going to embody myself for that event and not change it, even if other people didn't match my embodiment. And I've never done that before. And it didn't even matter how it went or how it was received, because the way I perceived this was that I followed through and I did that for myself. And that led to a lot of reflection, and it made me have like a fuck it moment and say, I'm living life for myself going forward. The last Band-Aid that I'm holding on to from doing that is putting that publicly out there for anyone to see and for anyone to take that as however they're going to take that. And I think that was the last thought I had before realizing I'm writing something. And my mind was going crazy before bed. I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I woke up. First thing I did was I wrote out what I posted immediately. And it was just so clear that this has been what I've wanted to do, is to just express myself unfiltered. And I haven't allowed myself to do that. And I didn't care anymore. And then a few days went on, a few days went by, 3 or 4 days went by.
Can you read to us what you posted?
Oh, yeah. But yeah, a few days went by and I knew that I had to edit it or just kind of like look over it again, put it into an online forum kind of thing. And there's a little bit of pain with it of like, oh, this is uncomfortable. But I just knew that I didn't have the option. So I knew that there was no other way to move forward. Okay, so here is what I wrote. In the past 3 years, my life has taken a complete 180. I entered my first adult relationship with my current girlfriend, started a podcast, quit my 9-to-5 job, attended several retreats where I pushed myself out of my comfort zone, and moved from New York City to Austin, Texas. Throughout this process, many things dawned on me, but one thing in particular held the most weight. Throughout my entire life, I have always tried to change who I was in the name of fitting in. I held the fear of being socially rejected for being too quiet, not enthusiastic enough, not relatable or understood, too emotional, too deep, and the list goes on. The shame we carry for simply being who we are grows to such a large extent that we think that we have to follow someone else's idea of how to live our life, whether it be our friends, family, or partner, even if we deep down don't like these variations of ourselves. We may blame these same people for not being happy because they don't allow us, quote unquote, to be ourselves. It's easy to fall victim to this when we aren't holding ourselves accountable in the first place. No one is ever holding you back from being you, except you. You are the one who restricts yourself, judges yourself, and shames yourself. Once you realize this, you can set yourself free. You can take accountability for your life. Here you'll realize that it was never anyone else that limited you. It was always just you and the deep fear you have of being your unguarded, open, and unmasked self. You are allowed to be you, no matter what that means to you, and you don't have to worry about how that is going to make anyone else feel. What I'm really saying is that I've hidden so many parts of myself in the name of fitting in. My softness, vulnerability, creativity. I always lived in fear of being myself, in fear of being rejected by others. Truth be told, it was much simpler. I rejected myself. It's funny how I want to share this as an act to further allow myself to show up as me and rip the Band-Aid off. The process of letting go of the narratives that have controlled us is a funny, illogical experience. After all, it's no one else's responsibility to free ourselves. It's only ours. Perhaps that's my reason for posting this, to attempt to eliminate my mask in a place where it's common to be masked. So something I'll also share is that days leading up to realizing that I was just going to express myself in this way, I was reading Tara Brach's book called Radical Self-Compassion, and she just opens the book by saying that she read an article written by a hospice care nurse, and the article summarized basically the regrets of the dying. And a line that stood out with her was, "I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself." And that also really fueled this as well, of realizing there's going to be a moment where we don't have any time left. And that might be the only moment in our life of true clarity where we have that. But then our time runs out. And I didn't want that to be me. That will not be me, because I'm doing that now. And it's uncomfortable. But it's better than regretting never having done it. So I think just to summarize this process, I've probably had this realization many, many times before, but it was just simply fueled by the act of realizing I have to live this life for myself, and I have to follow through with that for no one else other than myself.
I got the chills when you read the Tara Brach quote from the hospice nurse, because it's so clear. Like, I've read this so many times that you'll spend your whole life hiding from yourself. And I think it's real. It can happen. It would have happened to me if I didn't wake up. And I think what I'd say to the listeners here is that you deserve to spend this one life living it the way you want. And I can understand that's scary to go through all the obstacles to get you there. But when you can recognize that the only obstacles you're going to go through is yourself, is realizing that you can handle uncomfortable situations, you realizing you can handle what other people think, realizing that you can handle when other people don't agree with you. And I just think that it's a gift to be here. And how dare we not allow ourselves to be us? How dare we try to be someone else? And yeah, I think this is a topic we could talk about over and over again. I think it's very multifaceted. I would like to bring our friend George on to also talk about it, because I know he's really on a journey of challenging himself to express himself. And we're also going to be hosting in January, my friend George and I, a workshop to help people express themselves on social media and push through their insecurities. So I just think that so many ideas come from that. And whether you're looking to leave your job or you're just looking to live a more purpose-filled life, I think purpose is just being us. It's not getting anything outside of us, but rather the layers that start to unfold when you start to just show up as you. And I know, Daisy, you were mentioning to me like all these ideas you just started having after you posted that, and how you have to go through the discomfort to then tap into all of these new ideas and all these creative ideas. And I remember reading from an Instagram post from my friend George, it was like, you could miss out on an entire creative career being scared of what people think. And that hit me.
Well, it's true. We can miss out on an entire, not only creative career, but just an entire life, an entire experience. We can actually never experience it. We can only experience the messiness of our mind. And it's easy to get caught there. And only it's up to you to change that. It's only you who can change that. And if anything, if this podcast does anything for anyone, I simply hope that it helps people see that you have the power to change that. If you have the willingness, you can change it and you can experience life as it actually is and just enjoy it. That doesn't mean it's not going to be hard at times or painful. Of course it is. Of course it is. The biggest insights always come after feeling. But that's the experience of life. And I would hate for anyone to not actually ever experience it.
And I remember, Daisy, it's funny, like a few months ago, I remember you specifically being like, I'm just not someone who posts on social media. It's just not for me.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've been going through this for a while. I mean, we have a podcast. You tag me in clips and I post them on my Instagram. I've just been ignoring it, you know? So it's something that we can't listen to our thoughts. We can't. But shit, I'm really glad that I posted it. And I hope that it can be inspiration for others who have always wanted to do something that maybe they're telling themselves that they don't want to do anymore because they're too afraid to do it, whatever that is. So I hope that this can be a reminder that you only think about things you care about. And they may show up as things that you think you don't care about, but they're certainly things you care about because you only think about things you care about. So with all of that being said, you don't have to change who you are ever. And you can be who you are in every moment. But it starts with you.
And it starts with you asking the questions of, who am I? How am I showing up in the world? How am I doing the life audit of what is everything in my life? And how am I connected to that? I think it's always coming back to, am I connected to this? I think the more we kind of switch our life and rebuild it, we start to realize that everything in your life should be a holistic ecosystem. And you should be connected to all of it because it's you and it's your experience. And I'm seeing that now. You do have the ability to change your life, to map it out and reframe it and shift it so that everything is connected. So I hope that the listeners feel that they were able to learn from this episode of the importance of, not even the importance, but knowing that there is always more than what meets the eye. There's always more than what your thoughts might say. And we all deserve to have the life to figure out who we really are and to push through the insecurities, push through the thoughts. So thank you for listening. I think that if we will definitely be revisiting this topic, it is an ever-evolving topic. If there's anything that you wish you heard in this episode pertaining to this specific topic, email us, DM us, let us know, because ultimately we want to help you get to a point where you feel comfortable expressing yourself. So if there's a certain topic you're like, I want you guys to talk a little more about what other people think about you or things like that, just let us know. But until then, thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon on Thursday.